Much. This workshop now that we are about to start, our Talent Attraction, Retention, and Promotion Board Workshop is a follow-up from our December 1st TARP Board Workshop, at which staff highlighted the new compensation philosophy for Ramsey County. And our presenters, who I'd like to welcome, are here with us from Gallagher Benefits Services team. They're with us this morning to walk the county board through their detailed class and compensation, study methodology, and findings. This then will be an opportunity for the county board to more deeply understand, to ask questions about the foundational work that has resulted in the compensation philosophy that was highlighted at the meeting last month. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Deputy County Manager Berg to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Chair Carter. Do we have the PowerPoint projecting?
I do not see it.
I don't either. If we could do that, let me give some additional contextual information while we bring that forward. As Chair Carter referenced, this is follow-up to the December 1st board workshop. And I wanted to just highlight for the board some of the findings that we reported out in that board workshop. The first was that Ramsey County salaries are very competitive within our region. And we reported out as well that we had established a compensation philosophy as part of our TARP for work, and that included positioning Ramsey County at the 65th percentile of our relative competitors, and that percentile was aligned to our actual highly competitive salaries today. And we also discussed that our salary structures moving forward would include both a step zone and an enhanced performance zone. We highlighted findings in that board workshop as part of a broader TARP update inclusive of TARP 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I indicated then that we would be coming back to have our Gallagher colleagues walk the board through their detailed math and methodology. We can dive into regression analyses this morning to the extent all of you are interested in doing that. We brought in Gallagher almost 2 years ago now. As a result of a competitive solicitation, we were extremely impressed by their expertise and their experience working in this class and compensation field. And I'm delighted today to introduce Mike Verdorn and Ronnie Charles with Gallagher Benefits Services, who are going to walk us through, who are going to walk us through this detailed methodology. Ronnie is the Managing Director and Practice Leader for the Public Sector and Higher Education Practice, and Mike is the Managing Principal with that same practice at Gallagher Benefits Services. And Mike, if we could go on to the next slide, I just want to speak to that briefly, and then I'll turn it over to you and Ronnie. The board will recall that the TARP project is a long and complex one. I mentioned that we've been working with Gallagher since early 2019. On this slide, we highlight the work that has been completed, the job task surveys, the PDQs, the salary survey of the comparable governments, the private sector salary data, and starting to assign employee allocations into the new structure. Gallagher's going to walk today through their findings, the salary survey and the private sector data. And at the end, my colleague Scott Williams will speak to our next steps. I also want to highlight that following this board workshop, we will be posting more detailed information to RamseyNet that will include more specific findings from the custom survey referenced here. We'll also have 3 virtual information sessions scheduled for staff later this week and into next, as well as for a briefing for our labor unions to give all of our staff an opportunity to talk to Gallagher and hear from them directly on these findings. So with that, Mike or Ronnie, I'm pleased to turn it over to you to start walking the county board through your product here.
All right, thanks very much, Joanna and Scott. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. Sorry, flipping through, there it goes. appreciate the opportunity to be here, and we'll kind of continue to move forward through this. And again, please stop us if you have any questions at all, and we'll be tracking those questions. And sometimes the answer to that question may be coming up a little bit into the future. So, well, first I come to you from just across the river. I live over in Minneapolis. Have a pleasure to work with a client so close to home. It's always nice to do that when we have a chance to work with somebody in the counties and municipalities within Minnesota as well. So we're going to start with the bulk of the project that really did focus on making sure that we understood the work. So we're going to walk you through all the different phases and the steps and the activities that we took as a team. And this was not just Ronnie and myself. This was a collective effort. We have about 8 of us here in Minneapolis, as well as we have some policy experts, and we're kind of informed both. I know this is TARP 3 focused, but we did have information from all the context that was gathered through TARP 3 and some of the focus groups and the policy work that was being done there to help us craft this and make sure that we're not doing things in isolation. I think that's the biggest takeaway that we have. And so we're sharing that with our team as well and making sure everybody's working together. So if you remember back in February 2019, February, March, we started kicking off and we sent out questionnaires to all the employees. It was a big, heavy lift to get those out. We had a first formal kickoff on a snowy winter morning on a countywide management meeting. We kicked off what the project was itself, and we introduced questionnaires to everybody, PDQs, position description questionnaires. We really want to start at that level to make sure all employees have an opportunity to provide us with information with regards to what their jobs are. We want to couple that with the job descriptions and then with a broader understanding. So we did distribute PDQs. All employees had an opportunity to complete those PDQs and submit those. There was a process was they completed, sometimes individuals, sometimes a team of employees. If they felt like their jobs were similar enough, they would work together on them and submit one PDQ. Those were submitted, then supervisors reviewed them, and then also department heads, and then ultimately through human resources, then to us. We received approximately 2,000 PDQs back, which is a good number. They represented a high number of the job titles, et cetera. Any job titles that we did not have a PDQ for, we looked at the current or updated job description for that information, so we had content on every single PDQ. Then we took that and had a good content review. That was our next step. From that, we conducted 47 separate occupational panels. And by occupational panel, we mean we might have had anywhere from 2, 3, 4 to like 10 different employees in a meeting to talk about the similarities and differences in the different levels of jobs that they represent there. So it gives us an opportunity to read about it and then talk about those jobs as well with those key stakeholders, which are the employees as that. About 300 employees were included in those occupational panels. Those represented approximately 90% of the job titles in the employee population that exists. So we're not able to talk to everybody, but we did have about 4 or 5 days of heavy occupational panels at different locations around the county, different timings, all of those aspects as well. From that, we developed our draft classification structure, different job families, different classification series, and different levels. From that, we had then we reviewed that with department heads as well. Prior to that, we did have individual meetings with department heads. So we're getting context from employees as well as department heads, and then pull together the next slide here, which is kind of just a big picture movement from what was in place before to what we have recommended now. In the past, there were 496 active job classification titles that the county had. From that, we pulled together and had 33 job families that existed. Now we have a very detailed, comprehensive Excel workbook and matrix that have been developed for human resources and the project team to look at. 33 different job families, 64 series within those job families. Some job families may only have one series within it, but what this allows for is for future growth. There are going to be jobs that are created in the next 3, 5, 10 years that do not exist right now. But there has to be a context and an ability to create a new level, a new family, or a new series within it, and then be able to build out from that. So 33 families, 64 series, and 325 classifications. That is our recommendation now. We ultimately, I think we started with about 250, and then through conversations and review of the class structure by human resources, as well as by department heads, we kind of proliferated that a little bit and ended up with 325. Now, our ultimate goal is not to simply just reduce the number. It is a byproduct of kind of the work that's being done in the review of all the content that's delivered. So similar bodies of work, facilitates that visual career path for employees. What's the next level? Because the next level for somebody may not be in the department or the location that they're currently working in at Ramsey County. And we want that to be a little bit more obvious. This is a sample picture of what that does look like when it comes to kind of the actual titles that exist. So for example, we created a job family called administrative support. That's a family that exists across all the different county operations. These are example titles of some employees in those titles that may have been allocated to administrative technician. It does not mean that all employees that are with the administrative planning assistant were all allocated to administrative technician, because we had individual PDQs for a lot of those employees to get them into the right classification. In addition to the individual PDQs, we had review of allocation by human resources, as well as by department heads, to make sure that we are putting people into the right levels based upon the work they're doing now. So this is an example to kind of show what job title consolidation may exist. It is typical that we see more job title consolidation in the administrative support area than we do in some other areas, as you can see with the accounting and finance. There were a few titles that did get allocated kind of down together. Does not mean that we eliminated levels or anything like that, but sometimes those numerical levels more exist for compensation differences. And if I'm there for 2 years and I move up to number 2, number 3, et cetera, we're trying to look for different levels of job responsibility, decision-making, and complexity in that as well, so that there's a balance of what the job responsibilities are, as well as what the internal valuation would be. So these are examples. Again, this does not mean that all Secretary 2s move to administrative technician. It means that there was some employees in Secretary 2 that moved into administrative technician, but they could have moved to other levels as well. So that's just a picture. We wanted to kind of show you what that looks like individually. Those current county classifications are representative of hundreds of PDQs within those individual titles. So from that, after we created that draft classification structure, after we reviewed that, after with the human resources, with the department heads, and had our best idea of what the different levels of work are in the job families, we look at the decision band method. We look at job evaluation, internal equity. Now a methodology is required in the state of Minnesota for compliance with the Local Government Pay Equity Act. There are many other organizations in Minnesota that do use the decision band method for this. We've just worked with the city of Blaine to help them revise it. They had it in place in early 1980s as well, in 1984, when the Local Government Pay Equity Act came into effect. However, the decision band method is meant to be unique and applied to every single organization individually. The methodology is there, but it needs to reflect what the priorities and importance and the internal equity at each organization. From the decision band method helps you to look at the internal equity for compliance for that, but also it helps with the long-term sustainability of the overall system. Looking at internal equity, job value, it helps to assign jobs to pay grades, and especially over time, as new jobs are created that you're not going to be able to have market data for potentially, or as jobs continuously change, you have a methodology that human resources can go back to and say, yes, that job has changed at a substantial enough that it goes from this level to this level internally, and that can be applied consistently. So that's something that we are there to help HR with on an ongoing basis. We help numerous clients with it on an ongoing basis, depending on how much they would like our support. We're all open to, and we're having those conversations now. So what we did is we had DBM decision method training sessions for the county HR. We had multiple ones when we could be back on site and everything like that. We were in one of the training rooms over in human resources, and we said, here's different PDQs, here's these, and here's how you apply it. And we had different practice sessions and everything like that. And then we really had focused a lot of time, especially with the project leadership and the project sponsors too, to make sure we had those internal equity levels appropriate so that they could help explain it as well. So in the last few months, in October, November, December, we really did kind of hone in and look at how can they make sure they're explaining these internal equity values appropriately. So DBM achieves a system that supports sustained pay equity, because you are looking at the decision-making requirements of the job content, not the people in the job. It has been proven statistically to be gender and race neutral, and we can help show that as well. Consistent and ongoing implementation and maintenance of the system helps to maintain that internal equity. We've worked with numerous organizations around the country that have been able to maintain this system for over 20 years with ongoing annual maintenance. That's the key aspect of this. It's not a stagnant product. This is a living document, a living system that's continuously going to be evolving, and you had the framework in order to make sure that happens. So I'm going to kind of go through this part here in the next slide just a little bit quickly, because I can definitely kind of talk a lot about the decision band method because I'm fairly passionate about it. I think it is a very valuable system. But what we're looking at here is a process to determine internal equity. This is the methodology itself. Now, HR has had a lot more detailed information about this, but it's a 3-step process. We're looking at trying to have funnel jobs into the right category. Many times, the Local Government Pay Equity Act, they're going to have job evaluation systems that are going to be a point factor system. There are points in this system, but they are behind the scenes. And many times a point factor system is trying to add up points to get to the certain grade level that you want it to be. Sometimes in our experience, those are more open to manipulation and customization for an organization that are sometimes not sustainable or not helpful. For example, you may say, hey, we're going to hire this job. It's going to require a bachelor's degree. Therefore, it's worth more points. Therefore, we're going to pay at this level, which has a lot of institutional ramifications or anything like that when it comes to impacting diversity, equity, inclusion as well. With this one, we're looking at all the job responsibilities, and we want to place that job into the right band first. Many jobs at an organization are going to have various levels of responsibility. Those could be, that in my job, I got some responsibilities that are very routine. I have responsibilities that are more strategic. We want to evaluate all the essential responsibilities and say, what is the highest level decision-making that is required in this job? And it immediately goes into that bucket. It could be into band C, band D, band E, whatever it is. What's the highest level that's expected of that role? Not trying to add up to get to that level first. Then we're going to take all those jobs that might be in band C and say, now, what is the relationship of those jobs in band C? Is there any supervisory or lead work among jobs that are in this bucket? Now that helps us validate that we have placed the job into the right bucket first. But we want to look at that internal evaluation there. We're going to divide that into 2 grades. So you have one bucket, divide it into 2 grades. Then we're going to look at all the jobs that are in that small bucket and grade for the subgrade aspect. This is the most subjective part of the methodology. And please note that every job evaluation methodology is going to be subjective in nature. What we're trying to do in this product is relegate that to the last step in this, because what that ends up with is a higher level of inter and intra-rater reliability when it comes to the application of the methodology. More often, a room full of people are going to come to the same conclusion time and time again, as well as the same conclusion together, because the methodology helps them bring that thought process there. So I can get into a lot more details here, but I want to make sure we get into the numbers, and sometimes folks will say the more fun stuff as well. This is a picture of the distribution of employees when it comes to the decision band method and the ratings that exist there. This is a very typical distribution that we are going to see. It's going to be kind of a slightly skewed bell curve, going to peak right between B and C. Because in that area, that's where you have the highest number of employees. When you talk about the public safety and the human services aspect, that's where the most number of employees do exist. You can see some of those titles that are there. When we're talking about engineering technicians, when we're talking about investigation, maintenance and operations, when we're talking about human services, public health nurses, those types of roles. This is the distribution. Those are sample jobs that are placed in that. Now, please remember that within band B, within band C, and within band D, there are other multitude of levels within it. So there's other way to have a hierarchy within each band as well, based upon the methodology. But this is just a picture of a distribution of what that does look like. So this brings us somewhat to the end of kind of the internal focus of this. So I wanted to stop and see if there's any questions on the job family classification structure side and the internal equity side. Now we're going to shift and look at the other half of the equation which is the market data.
Mike, thank you for pausing just for a second. You have presented quite a bit so far. I do not have any hands up, but I do want to pause in case there are members who would like to, at this opportunity, ask a question about the decision bands or, okay,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, this is Commissioner McGuire. Sorry, I'm not raising my hand in the
It's okay.
right place here, but thank you, Mike, for all of this information. I'm looking at this and yeah, digesting it. I'm just on this county employees by band with sample class titles. So in E, if there's a one director, like the community corrections director, is that assuming that the public health director, that all directors would be there, or no? Is it not by that? Can you just explain again? It's not the job title, it's what they do, or talk a little bit more. I know you've been talking about that, but now that I'm seeing it, you know, in more specific terms, just curious.
Yeah, no, that's an absolutely great question, because there is a difference sometimes too in the different sizes of organizations that exist. And, you know, we work with some of the counties, some smaller counties that have elected officials at various levels, and they're also a department head. And it's like, we're elected official and a department head, but not all department heads have the same scope of responsibilities in a way. And so in a way, yes, most of the directors are within that band E. However, we are looking at that through the decision band method and knowing that there are different organizational structures that are in place that may relegate other positions to the different band based upon if they report to an external board or an appointed board from the county commissioners as to what levels those positions might be at. And that's where we really did focus in with Gail, Scott, and Joanna to make sure that it was like, hey, what are those institutional things that are in place that help to determine what levels they are at. Now, in band E, the community corrections director, those are examples of ones that are there. They might be at some differing grade levels or subgrade levels within that band as well to be reflective of that. But there are a lot of nuances, and I can assure you that the thought process and the discussions and the focus that the project team has played on this has really come to a very good conclusion. It's pushed us to try to put this in a different light and different pictures and different frameworks. We created kind of a different continuum PowerPoint for the project team to help lay this out and help with their thought process on the things that were vital to Ramsey County when it came to the evaluation perspective as well. So I hope that answers your questions. I don't want to get into too many details of all the different jobs, but if that is
no, yeah, that's really helpful, Mike. Thanks just for a little bit more about that background. And so for my own, way of thinking, we have directors, we have deputy county manager, we have directors, we have these job titles. So I'm thinking that with this presentation, we're going to try not to think of job titles because that's what you're looking at. I mean, you're looking at maybe we'll switch some of these job titles, or, that's what we're really doing here, is that all directors aren't going to be in one category. Maybe now it's just that that's what you're looking at. Yeah,
that's a great point that you bring up, that sometimes that this structure through this might help to have some growth and establishment of consistency on those job titles across the county as well, so that analyst means something, that coordinator means something, that it may not be that you're all in the same exact pay range, but it still means something that, hey, we're in one of these 4 pay ranges because we are coordinators, and a coordinator means this type of responsibility.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McGuire. Commissioner Reinhardt.
Thank you. I had trouble getting in to begin with, and so if this has already been covered, fine. I'm looking at, excuse me, band F in policy. And I know that the bottom is only sample class titles, but, and I know that obviously the elected board is we're employees, but a very different level of employee or classification. I'm not sure how that works, but regardless, for band F, it says determines organization scope, direction, and goals. And to me, that sounds like what we do as a county board. And so if that was covered, I can go back and listen. But so I was a little thrown off by that.
No, you are exactly right, and that is if it was in sometimes in smaller counties where the county board has the even more activity into the day-to-day operations. I think in some of the counties where they have a county coordinator form of government as well, or anything like that, that may not have that county manager, county administrator purview. The county board definitely does sit in band F. We just detail the titles here that are in the scope of the study itself as well, but the county board would be in band F. It would be at the higher grade within band F than the county manager position within there. We just did not list it there, but you're exactly right, and I appreciate the interpretation of it, because that's where the county board elected officials sit.
Correct.
So there is a hierarchy within the hierarchy here that we will
Yes.
certainly pay attention to. Thanks, Commissioner. Looking for others.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
Okay, I think we're back on track, and thank you very much for allowing that time for us to clarify.
Madam
Oh.
Chair, may I ask a question? Sorry.
Oh, please go ahead.
So just following on Commissioner Reinhardt's line of questioning, then where would our aides fall in the band?
Thank you.
That is a good question, and I honestly do not have that information off the top of my head right now. I think we looked at some of those positions. I cannot recall. I don't have the detailed evaluations up in front of me at this time. I don't know if Scott, Joanna, if there was a comment that I know we talked about those in the past, or we can look them up and respond to the question later as well.
Mike, this is Joanna. Commissioner Metis-Castillo, we have not yet completed the allocation of all employee positions. And I don't have the aid information in front of me either. I'm not confident we've even completed that work. So this is a broad brush to give you a feel for how the decision band method and the job classification evaluation is going to be different than what we have today, but I don't have detail on really any specific positions.
Commissioner Metis-Castillo, thank you so much for asking that question. I know that there were numbers based on the number of groups you were able to talk with early on in the presentation, and it would be curious to know whether you'll be talking with that group yet, or if in fact that is something that has already passed and now it would be a matter of determining the classification. That is a question. Okay. Is there a possibility you'd still be having an interview with that team as such, or has that passed and now you're determining simply where they would fit within the classifications?
Madam Chair, that phase has passed. We relied on the position description questionnaires and the occupational panels, the steps that that Mike outlined previously as part of our process.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Metis-Castillo. So we'll look forward to seeing that. I do not think there are additional questions. By the way, Commissioner, had I missed your question, Commissioner Metis-Castillo, was your hand raised at that point, or?
Yes, it was.
was.
That's all right.
I didn't see it, so it's not coming up to the top. Forgive me. I'll check more fully. All right, we'll go back to the presentation.
All right. With that, let me click on the screen so I can shift my, there it goes. All right, so the next phase was to get the salary survey out to all the different participants. And the first step there was selecting the benchmark jobs. So that's why it was key to make sure we got as far through the classification portion and the draft job evaluation portion of this to make sure that we were selecting benchmark jobs that are representative of the county population. So what our goal is to select jobs that are representative of all the different job families that exist, of those 33 job families. They're also representative of the pay, the different levels through the decision band method. They are kind of in representation to that as well. So we don't have it highly skewed towards the high level or the low level jobs or to certain job families. They're in the same proportion. We did analysis too to say of the 134 benchmark jobs, how many of those jobs are part of a bargaining unit, and is that number of benchmark jobs in the same proportion to what the jobs are at the county that are represented by a bargaining unit. So it's trying to be that small picture, that appropriate sample size that we're all looking for within a statistical analysis to say, now we can take this and extrapolate it out across the county, because the purpose here is to collect enough market data to make the best picture on a full salary structure. Now we are going to have individual data points that come back, but the result is not to say, "Oop, this job is 10% below the market, therefore it needs a 10% adjustment." The purpose is to say, here's what the big picture is. Here's how we can take all that data together and develop a salary structure that provides that framework, the minimum, midpoint, and maximum that allow the county to be competitive. So highly populated jobs that we are confident we're going to find good market data for in those other organizations as well. And then sometimes we have some jobs that are in there that have some recruitment or retention issues as well. So the 134 benchmark jobs represent over 75% of the employee population, which far exceeds our minimum threshold of 50% as well. So it's over, and it's also just under half of the number of classification titles, 325. And originally we had about 275, 250, but those expanded just a little bit based on some unique characteristics. So overall, we are far exceeding the metrics that we need in order to develop a valid and defensible salary structure with that.
Chair,
So, yes.
Madam Chair, just on this point, just a quick clarification. So I'm glad to hear that this is what you did. I had a question about, sometimes you send out a survey and only so many people get back to you, and not everybody gets back to you. So then you do the work based on who responds to the survey. So I'm assuming you did get the representative sample that wasn't just based on who responded to the surveys. You had to keep going back to make sure that we got representation from all the categories. And it wasn't just, if you heard from 20 people in one category and 5 in the other, you tried to equalize that out. So you didn't just use the data from that. Could you just talk a little bit more about who responds to these surveys?
Yeah, I definitely will. Over the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as kind of exactly. It's a great question because it kind of brings us into this next one. But I appreciate I appreciate kind of the other aspect of your question was saying, in some jobs, we're going to get a higher number of responses than other jobs. And we do need to take the data that comes back to us and not try to extrapolate it to make it bigger than what the actual representation of it was. Because almost every organization that responds to this is going to have a deputy sheriff. That's reality. But not all of them are going to have the same level of public health nurse if we have that as a benchmark job. So some of those may be a little bit different in the number of participants, but there are bare minimum thresholds that we need to reach in order to make sure that we can use that data appropriately. We do follow the Sherman antitrust regulations when it comes to being a neutral third-party salary administrator. So we need to make sure we have at least 5 data points for every single benchmark job in order to summarize that and provide the county with, this is a valid data point that can be used in the building of a salary structure. We don't want to send something back and say, yeah, let's build a salary structure off this job that only had matches from Hennepin and Olmsted County. It's like, that's only 2 data points. We want to make sure it's a bigger set than that as well. So we'll get into a little bit about that here.
Thank you.
Yep. So we sent it out to 59 selected public sector organizations. Now, we sent the survey out only to public sector organizations because in our experience, private sector organizations are not going to respond. They are very concerned about data privacy, even though we are going to follow the guidelines of a survey administrator and only show aggregate information. They're still concerned about it. Also, in most cases, they don't view public sector as being a competition for some of those positions as well. So in addition to that, we're going to talk about published salary surveys that we use to represent the private sector so that we're looking at that comprehensive labor market in which the county competes. From that custom comparator list, we identified the core group of 9 organizations. This was consistent with the TARP 3 survey that was sent out. We did send out 2 surveys through TARP 3 and TARP 4. We decided early on in this, along with the county project sponsors, that we did not want to send out one huge survey because that would really potentially diminish the participation in that survey as well. So we sent one on early on regarding TARP 3, but sent it out all to the same organizations in both surveys. This one was sent out in January of 2020, and we purposely waited until after January because that's most organizations are going to adjust their salary structures and actual pay on January 1 of every year. So these are the 9 comparisons that we identified in the core custom survey group. So we have the 7-county metro area, we have the city of St. Paul, as well as the University of Minnesota. That was the primary group. We did get active participation from all the ones that you'll see in green. So 27 organizations actively participated in the survey by providing us their information. The other orange ones, the 15 organizations that are in orange that you'll see, are the ones that we were able to data mine. We were able to go out to their websites. They had updated job descriptions that we could connect to a salary structure. So we're matching job content, not just job title in that. And in many of those, we were able to send it back to them and say, here's the matches that we made, and they were reviewed and validated. So that is the place that we use to collect all the information. They actively participate. We review all of that as well to look for key outliers. So if an organization sends a survey back, and I'm going to start flipping through the next slides that I'm talking about this so you can see that other names. But if we get a data survey back from an organization, we're going to look at all of the matches that they have made and all the data they have submitted. If they have, for some reason, an actual salary that is below the minimum or above the maximum, that's going to be a follow-up question that we have for them. If they have 2 different benchmark jobs and it's the same exact data, there's a follow-up question for them. We're going to look for outliers when it comes to all of the IT technicians. We had 3 organizations that were 15% higher than everybody else. Why is that? Did they match the wrong level here? We need to follow up with them. Send us your job description so we can validate that match. So this was an extensive amount of work with our team to be able to review all those, data mine this information, and pull all that together to create the salary structure comparisons that exist. So this is the broad picture of everything that we sent that survey out to and who we got participation from. Any questions on that list before we summarize the kind of the next step with regards to published surveys?
I see no hands raised. Are there questions? We'll go ahead. Thank you.
So in addition to the custom survey, the county also competes with the private sector for labor, especially being in a major metropolitan area that we all are. We look at, these are the different surveys that we looked into to make sure we're collecting other information. And being in a major metropolitan area, many of these surveys, such as CompData, Willis Towers Watson, Mercer, and the Gallagher surveys as well, we're able to get a Minneapolis, St. Paul metro data cut for a lot of those, because of the high number of companies that exist here. So in those, here's the data that we collected. We made matches to those. You know, those are organizations like Ecolab and 3M and Best Buy. They participate in surveys like this as well. The Gallagher surveys are meant to reflect that healthcare industry. Gallagher has a very large healthcare niche when it comes to helping on compensation levels. So they conduct some of these surveys as well. And we know that's a large portion of the employees as well. Within that, though, we're looking at different data cuts that exist. So for example, when we're collecting this from our benchmark, our survey library, we want to collect ones from for-profit, not-for-profit, and government data cuts. Now we're going to bifurcate those appropriately to make sure that we have the right levels, that the right match that exists. We only want the private sector to represent the private sector, but we collect those government cuts in case we need to supplement some of that custom survey data. We look at the geographic region. We want to focus on the Minneapolis, St. Paul metro area first. But if that data cut for some reason is not available, then we're going to go back out to the state of Minnesota, to the Great Lakes region, or the Midwest cut, or the national cut. If we have to go outside any of those that are outside of the metro area here, we're going to adjust those. And I'll talk about that here on the next slide as well. but we're looking at operational budget, full-time employees as well. All of these are key indicators about what is that level of work to make sure we're getting the appropriate matches that exist. And we had a priority list of which ones of these we wanted to take in order to make sure we had the right data. But it also depends on the data from the benchmark job. Let's say, for example, we had an accounting technician and the Minneapolis-St. Paul cut had a match, but it was only 7 organizations that participated in it that matched to that job. If we looked at the state of Minnesota cut, maybe there was 35 organizations that matched their job to that. For our team, we would recommend using the one that has the 35 organizations as opposed to the 7, because it is a more comprehensive view of that. So those are some of the key decisions that we did make and recommendations that we made throughout the course of the making sure we're collecting the right data that exists. So we're pulling everything together at a comprehensive high level. So on the next slide here talks about the different adjustments that we have made to the data. To all the published, for all the custom data first, we did get everything down to the hourly rate, because at different organizations, a full-time level might be at different annual number of hours. So we wanted to pull everything down to that lowest common denominator of the hourly rate in which those positions are paid. So we asked for what is the full-time status, what does full-time mean, then what is the annual and hourly. We asked for hourly rate. Sometimes we get annual back, so we have to make those adjustments. From the published survey sources, as you could see on the previous slide, many of those published survey sources are effective at different dates in the year. Some might be January 1, 2019, some might be July 1, 2019, some might be October 2019. We aged all of those forward to the common date of January 1, 2021 by using a common estimated and common through salary structure adjustment. World at Work, which is the Professional Compensation Association, conducts an annual salary budget survey of thousands of organizations around the country. Many public sector organizations and private sector organizations participate in that. Now, last year when that was published in the springtime, they republished one in coming this fall because of all the impacts of COVID-19 to salary structures. We still found that the average actual pay adjustment was going to be about 3%, and the salary structure adjustment was going to be about 2%. So using those, we aged that published survey data forward to January 1, 2021.
May I pause for a second and check in with Commissioner Reinhardt for a question?
Thank you. In looking at these, I just wanted to make sure that I understood between the table or the explanation on pages 14 and 15 of the presentation. You referred to the fact of the different cuts. Mm-hmm. And you gave the example of something where in the metro area you had 7 data sets, and statewide you had 35, and so you would recommend using the 35. But then you also have on the page 15 is the aging and geographic adjustments. And so the fact that you chose number 7 was maybe just what caught my attention. But I mean, there are 7 counties in the metro area, and I would think that because of the geographic, I'm having trouble. If you could help me out a little bit with the data cuts and what they actually mean as far as the organization type, geographic, and so forth. Because when you said that, I thought, well, wait a minute. It seems like you would want to go with that is closest geographically, rather than the larger data set. So if you could just help me out with that, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation that I'm just not getting right now.
No, and I apologize for the confusion. I mean, pulling out the number 7 is like, yeah, there are 7 counties in the metro area, but the using that, it was meant to reflect the published survey sources that were collected. So, I hit the wrong, this one right here. So, for example, in the Willis Towers Watson surveys, typically those are going to be private sector organizations that participate in it. And we are going to try to collect the private sector data cut that would exist for that. So we're going to select that for-profit data cut. we want that to represent the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. But if there is the match there only has 7 organizations that matched a job to that, and those 7 organizations could be, honestly, they could be C.H. Robinson, Ecolab, my gosh, it was West Publishing. I can't remember what it is now. But what all those different, it could be any of those that match to that job. If it only has 6 or 7, and here's that data cut from the metro area, but the state of Minnesota was a little bit broader because there's a lot of key companies that exist in St. Paul and Duluth and Rochester. It is a little bit broader and it has 35 organizations. We may want to take that data cut to represent the full state, but still adjust that data to the metro area as well.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay, good. Yep, I understand a lot of moving pieces here, and we make sure that we explain kind of what that process was. So that was the geographic adjustment that we're making. We're using the metropolitan Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, kind of that larger US Census established MSA that exists to adjust to that one, not just St. Paul. So it's looking at that broader metro area. That's where you compete most highly with everything. So those are the adjustments that have been made to the market data. From that, once we have reviewed the integrity, the validity of all the individual matches that have been made, both in the custom survey as well as the published survey sources, then we summarize everything. Now we're looking at the summary of the data in 2 different approaches. We're looking at actual salary. What is the actual pay rate for a full-time equivalent employee at those various positions? We want to look at that in comparison to the 25th, 50th, 75th percentile. We started with those 3. Now, per some of the comparisons, we had a great direction from the county leadership to say, let's look at that 65th percentile as well. And I'll talk about a little bit about that as we get a little bit further into that of what that represents. So we're looking at that, we're looking at actual salaries, but then we're also looking at salary range minimums, midpoints, and maximums, actual salaries and salary structures. We want to understand what the differences are between those. Many times on an annual basis, actual salaries are going to be moving. Salary structures may lag behind in a lot of organizations. They're going to move people through them and then, no, we're not going to adjust our structure this year. We're just going to move people, give them a COLA, something like that. And all of a sudden the minimums misalign, that kind of stuff. Sometimes they tell 2 different stories. When we're making those comparisons to the market, we're looking at these different competitive levels. And again, I just want to go back and say, yes, we have individual jobs of those 134 benchmark jobs that are there we're not here to say, yep, that job should be adjusted by this. This is meant to be, are there issues that may exist? Highly competitive, plus or minus 5%, competitive, 5 to 10% off the market. Then you get into the misaligned area. We've had a number of experiences too, where it says, hey, you are significantly misaligned with the market for this position. But if you start looking at the data that exists, it's like, wow, the 4 people that you all have, that our client has in that job, all started within the last 2 years. They should probably be misaligned with the market. They should probably be lower than the market because they started at the minimum of your pay range in comparison to where everybody else is at. So it doesn't mean that the data has to tell a story, and there might be valid reasons as to why that is misaligned. So that's why we're trying to take this at an aggregate level and look at the county. So there are 4 different labor markets based upon all the market data that we collected, custom survey and published survey sources, 4 different labor market groups that we looked at. The combined market is everything. All of the custom survey data, all of the published survey sources that exist, okay? Everything together, that's the combined market. We looked at the core group, those 9 organizations, plus the private sector data from the published survey sources. We looked at the full custom survey group, all of those 41 organizations out of the 57 that we sent the survey to that we have data for. So that's all public sector. Then we looked at just the core group, the 9 organizations of that 41 that represent the public sector. So we wanted to make sure we could take that really broad group of data and dissect it down to make sure we're making the right comparisons to see if there's differences based upon the data sets that exist. So what we found is from all of these is that overall at the 50th percentile, the county is highly competitive. If we look down through that market 50th right here, it's going to fluctuate a little bit. You know, the full combined market 1.8% above, core group plus the private 0.1%, 3.6% above, and 2.7% above. So when you talk about the local 9 comparisons here, where the county itself is about 2.7% higher across 92 of the benchmark jobs. Now, we could not summarize all of the data off all of the benchmark jobs because we're only looking at 9 within that, but it's still a solid percentage. It's a sufficient percentage in order to build a salary structure off of. But what this helps tell us is that what is that impact in some of these of the core group plus the private? You can see that it pulls it down a little bit, being 2.7% above on the public sector, only 1.1% above here when you pull in those private sector comparisons as well. But still, what this has showed is the due diligence through the negotiations as well as HR and the strategy of the county from the leadership that actual salaries have remained competitive with the market. Okay.
Hey, Mike, let me just, if I could just add one thing to that. I think what it shows is we have remained in that corridor absent an overarching strategy for the organization to date, which is a commendable thing on an individual level. But when we step back, we had no idea what this would show on an aggregate level because we've not gone through this process in decades past. And so I want to both commend the individual work that's happened, but acknowledge that because of the lack of a strategy and structure, it leads to all sorts of day-to-day challenges that this process will hopefully help us work through.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. That's exactly right. The next piece is that there are different job families, there are different levels that are going to be more off the market than other ones. And what we want to do is take this in addition with the salary ranges and the structure that exists to say, now let's pull together and say, make sure that all of these jobs have that internal equity so that you have the framework to make consistent adjustments across the variety of functional areas that the county has. So you're not competing within yourself for different for talent, but get people into the right spot based upon the talents that they have. So this is the
Excuse
same.
me. Could
Oh, yeah.
I ask you to, with the chart just before, to take a look at other percentiles and just talk us through the meaning of beyond the 50th percentile?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So that 50th percentile. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
I was just saying the significance of those different results.
Gotcha. Sorry, it faded out, so I thought you were done. Yes, so we typically want to focus at the 50th percentile, and the reasoning starting at the 50th percentile is right in the middle of actual pay. So you got 50% of organizations below, 50% of above. So whatever that middle point is in the market. It's not an average. An average can be skewed if you have a higher percentage up or low or anything like that. 50th percentile is where over 80% of organizations, public and private, are going to be fixating their salary structure. It is sometimes deemed the market rate for a job that would exist, many times within collective bargaining or even for target pay practices, say, hey, the market rate for that job is this, it's going to be the 50th percentile. And so
Thank you. I'm sorry, I think I misinterpreted what that 50th percentile was, so I appreciate it.
Got you. So our goal is to make sure that we have these numbers in this comparison here so that when we develop a salary structure, we can show that the ranges that are developed are going to help the county encompass the 25th, 50th, 65th, and 75th percentiles so that the ranges allow you to be competitive across the full spectrum of the market. New employees would typically start towards the 25th percentile, move towards the 50th, and then have the ability to pay above that market as well for sustained performance or anything else that the, on a performance pay level that the county would put in place on a strategy-wide basis.
Before you move forward, I need to call on Commissioner Fretham.
Yes, thank you, Chair Carter. So with what you just said there, would it be a reasonable interpretation of this data that we tend to start new employees at a higher wage than the market typically does, but we don't necessarily compensate our more senior employees as well as the market would? Is that what we're seeing with the market at the 25th and 75th?
Well, it's that, but you're leading the 25th, so it sometimes it shows that you have a tenure within your classifications and positions that's consistent with the market, that's getting people to that market rate as well. They've been in that job long enough that they're at that level to be commensurate with the 50th percentile of the market. So there's a multitude of reasons why it could be on an individual job basis, but this is a very typical spread that we think. It could be the starting pay that you're bringing people in because they do have experience at that level, or they have progressed and they're higher within the range as at this point.
Thank you.
So actual pay here, and then salary structure comparison here. Again, to reflect on what Ryan had said as well, it does show that overall the ranges that exist on individual collective bargaining, individual positions, employee group basis has maintained competitiveness, absent any of that larger strategy that was in place to have a cohesive salary structure. So overall, highly competitive, but you can see some of those same impacts when it looks at the custom core group. You add in the private sector, your ranges are a little bit higher, anything like that. So those are the highlights to take out of this. It's the picture we had no idea what was going to tell us before. Absent any cohesive strategy, we're not trying to shift the overall competitive nature, but to use this highly competitive data to say, how do we set up a salary structure that allows the county to look forward to the future and build a salary structure that's going to sustain competitive nature. All right. So on the next pieces here, our big next step here, and we're going to get into some statistical analysis and everything, is to combine the internal equity with the market data. We want to pull those two pieces together. We're looking at pay trend lines at the 50th, 65th, and 75th percentile across all four of those labor market groups, and then figure out how do those compare and contrast so that the line that we want to select, that we would recommend that the county have the one that balances all the key attributes that exist in these different labor markets. Now, the 65th percentile is going to come up per conversations that we have with the project sponsors as well as Ryan to say, hey, we can show that we're highly competitive at the 50th percentile. And we can numerically, statistically say, let's base our salary structure at that level. But ultimately, on a strategy basis, how does that help move the county forward with a highly competitive nature of a salary structure and allow the county to recruit and retain through the talent acquisition, retention, promotion program? How do we help that progress? So we look at the 65th at that balancing point between the 50th and the 75th percentiles, and we're going to look at all of these comparisons. So our first step is to take all of the data from the county. Now, these are the Ramsey County average salaries within all 134 of those benchmark jobs. So we have an average salary for all of those. The next step, and x-axis is the internal equity. There are point values associated with that internal equity behind the scenes. Again, we're not trying to add up points to get to a certain level. We want the methodology to take us there. The y-axis is the dollar value of the job, whether that's internal or external. Next thing is we overlay the 50th percentile of the market. We overlay the 50th percentile of the market for those, and you can see there's kind of a common trend within that. And we want to take all of that data together to be able to build a salary structure and develop ranges off of that. So as you can see, we have this line of best fit. It's a regression analysis that regresses all of those points to a line of best fit for this data set. One of the key metrics that we look at is this R-squared value within this analysis. The R-squared value is showing the relationship between the x-axis and the y-axis. An R-squared value of 1.0 would mean that the points make the line itself. Now we have an R-squared value here of 0.86 if we round up from 0.858, 0.86. That's a very high relationship. Our minimum threshold is at least 0.8 to be able to move forward with the salary structure. It shows a strong relationship here. But again, this is the full combined market across the all of the public sector and private sector in comparison. And it visually shows that fact that the Ramsey County was 1.8% higher overall. Okay, the lines are almost mirroring each other. The next piece, and we pulled out all the plot points just to make it a little bit easier to read here. We have the 4 different markets that exist on the 50th percentile. And there's some very minor trends that we can see within that. You can see that that core custom group, that blue line, has a little bit of a different tail at the top and at the bottom, slightly different. But it also has a incredibly high R² value that has a more validity to that data set and building of that salary structure. Overall, it's still reflective of the overall trend, just some slight differences that are honestly reflective of, hey, it's a metro market. You're going to have similar tenure, the high tenure that might exist in some of the public sector organizations within that 9 groups, all of those different things. And it's going to constantly have some shifts to it. And that's the beauty sometimes of having this regression approach to this salary structure, because those individual plot points in the market are going to shift every single year. They're going to go up, they're going to go down. All of a sudden, if you have 3 department heads retire or leave, that's going to have a significant impact on the market rate for a department head in that field when you look at that small market. So having it look at it this way helps us to control for the volatility of some of the data. So the next step was to integrate that 65th percentile of the market as well. So we're looking at that 65th because Ramsey County, again, that black line right there is right overlaid with that 50th percentile, that orange line right there. So the question that the leadership had to this was like, yeah, we can say we're at that level and we can build a salary structure on that, but how does that help us move forward when something else that is able to help us move forward is so close to us?
Hey, Mike.
You can lead on the market. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I wanted to add the part on that. So the 65th percentile, as Mike cited, was something that we intentionally asked Gallagher to run after looking at the initial runs that they did of regression analyses at the different levels that they showed. 65th being 75th feels quite frankly too high to try and peg as a midpoint within the county and your core comp groups. 50th feeling a little middling when you think about being the 2nd largest county and one that is trying to attract and retain the best. And we sought to see what that would begin to look like at different levels. And so strategically, this 65th percent, when we talk about where we are trying to potentially anchor Ramsey County going forward, that's how we reach that piece. I'd be happy to talk more about it if you want, but I just wanted to make sure that was not Gallagher driving us to a strategy. That part was where their data helped us start to have a conversation for the first time. And today we're showing you the work behind it.
No, thank you very much, Ryan. That is a perfect example of saying, how does this data align with a strategy? How do we use this to move forward with that overall strategic decision on basing a salary structure? And as Ryan was saying too, this is the point in the market. We want to use this line. That was kind of the next topic, was to use this line to say, here's where we're going to build the midpoint of the salary structure so that we have that target pay rate at this line and then build ranges around this line. Now that is slightly different than traditional public sector, where many times target pay rates, target pay lines have been set at the maximum of a pay structure. And you move up with whether 5, 7, 9 steps from minimum to that target pay, and everybody's at the maximum. What this does is set that up differently. Say, here's our target pay at the middle of the market, knowing that we may need to be competitive at different levels, whether that's below, at, or above that market rate, depending on the competitive field in which we're in, as well as to achieve the talent acquisition, retention, and promotion initiatives that the county has. So building that line at that blue line balances, it reflects the current trend, it helps the county move forward, it meets that strategic visioning that the county leadership has as well, to have that message and that strategic look moving forward. But it also aligns with some of the other things that the county board and the county leadership have talked about, is building that salary structure in order to manage salary progression through the range as well. This is something that some clients at other locations have utilized, but it's a message to say, how do we move people through to make sure we're moving people to that midpoint, but then also have the ability to pay higher on that performance zone, merit increases that may exist, moving people from the minimum to that midpoint, knowing that that midpoint is leading the market at the 65th percentile of that core custom group. So having the proficiency zone, moving up to that 65th percentile, having that enhanced performance zone, once they've reached the market rate, performance-based increases that are available based upon the related performance, county budget, needs for positions, of a multitude of things that the county leadership has definitely been discussing as well.
It's important to add also that obviously a lot of this change in the way we would do compensation requires partnership from labor and conversations that will occur there. It's not a unilateral piece. And I just always think it important to state that, because this would be a significant change for the organization. I think a significant positive change, but it's one that we need to collectively bargain with many of our units. And we've had many conversations on the balance between performance pay and also allowing people the time and space to grow along their journey. This attempts to build a structure that recognizes that fairly compensates people along that journey methodically, but at some point has a higher expectation as you move into greater proficiency in your time with the organization. And I hope the board sees that in the attempts here to build a structure.
All right, so I wanted to pause right here before we get into kind of the salary structure development and just what that process is. There's still some key decision points and discussions with the sponsors of the project and county leadership on, you know, range spreads and implementation methods and all those types of things. But this is the foundation of the structure. Make sure you understand where the internal values and the internal classification families and structures come from, the external data, and how that's all pulled together to develop these salary structures and really reflect the strategy that the county is moving towards.
Thank you for the pause prior to building forward. I'll call on Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll just comment on this slide. I have a few questions for at the end that we'll catch up on, but I really appreciate this slide right here. You know, I think I mentioned it in past workshops, and, you know, just in conversation with Gail and Ryan in the past, I've always been really uncomfortable with kind of the steps based on longevity and how do you actually attach that to, I mean, the concept is the longer you're in a job, the more proficient you are, the more skilled you're at it. And so that's what those steps are, you know, inclined to try to compensate and capture. But it's not usually attached to demonstrating that that's occurring. It's more attached to a year of service. And so I really appreciate that we're taking a look at this in a way that there is a point in time where you really have to demonstrate the performance. You really have to demonstrate that you are providing a skill set or value that's over and above to continue on past just years of service step type increase here in melding this together. So I really appreciate this. And I do think, you know, it's going to be a change for employees as they take a look at it. They get used to, you know, step increases and based on years of service. But the fact is, I think as employees demonstrate the value that they add, especially if we're taking you know, we need to attach this to residents first, right? All this work that we're doing here, and that's some of the questions I got at the end, is always looking at it residents first, right? Because in the end, it's the resident, the person that we're serving, that is the end beneficiary of the work that our employees are doing. And we need to make sure that that's done in a way that compensates and rewards the employees for that value back to the residents. And so I support this. I think this is really good work here. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner.
I can't.
Okay, it may be just up from before.
No.
Okay.
All I heard was Commissioner. So did you say Reinhardt after
Reinhardt.
that?
Reinhardt.
Okay. All right. Well, a couple of things, both on this slide, 27 and on 26. I mean, my understanding of this is that there's not one method that fits all, basically, that there's a hybrid here between the step zone and the merit increases, that it's not cutting one out totally, or that there's a hybrid there. So that's probably my first question. The other question goes back to the chart on page 26. And to me, what that tells me is that by attracting, I mean, that we need to we need to start out higher to attract folks, but then we move into what's on page 27 as far as how do we retain them. So I know that's two very separate questions, but I would like to know, is that what 26 shows, that we need to go a little bit higher in order to attract, and then in order to retain, going to page 27, is it a combination of things, or are you recommending that it be one or the other between step and merit? Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Reinhardt, I'll let Mike speak on the regression piece in a second and add his thoughts specifically there and the fit of the current actuals on slide 26 with the 65th percentile and everything. What I was going to say is it is a two zone way of moving an employee through their time with Ramsey County. That is correct. It would be a hybrid approach that involves both, with the midpoint as defined in that chart being the 65th percentile, which can be confusing language, which is why we kind of had to step our way to it. And that's so what we're saying is, until you hit the 65th percentile of the market, which means we will compensate you fairly and hopefully better than most other agencies along your steps to proficiency and growth. After that point, to go beyond that, we have an obligation to the taxpayer, to the resident, to the organization, to try to move toward a more performance-based way of doing compensation, which all of this needs to align with the workshop HR led about a month ago related to core competencies. So it all tied back to those competencies being the way in which we make those definitional assessments.
Yeah, I appreciate that summary. It is that whole thought process of like, hey, the numbers are going to take you so far, and then you have to take those numbers, say, how do we apply those to the overall strategy and the approach that we're taking here? And on this page right here, that 65th percentile is showing that it's slightly above where the county is currently, because one of the things that we do have to think about is when you're building that new salary structure and thinking forward to the implementation as well, is that moving into a new structure and having too many employees that are too close or even at the maximum of a new structure is also not a way to move forward. And so having that structure moving forward helps to balance what Ryan brought up there with regards to the overall competitive nature and the strategy and moving people through the range and the citizens first, residents first aspect. And then also on the number side of it, how do we place people into these ranges and move forward in that same, in a kind of hand-in-hand approach. So I can answer more questions about the regression or anything like that. There's, if we reran it with updated data or anything like that, it's always going to shift a little bit. But the ultimate goal, and one of the reasons I neglected to say this earlier, was one of the reasons why we looked at that core custom market 65th to look at those 9 organizations was because of how it did reflect the overall broader market, both on the private sector side as well as the full custom survey market. But it's also something that year over year, the county itself internally can handle looking at those 9 organizations, say, if those 9 organizations shifted salary structures by these percentages, we can apply that to our structure here and handle that work internally as well. Because that's a smaller group. They don't have to go out to all 57 or 59 organizations or 41 that participated to try to reassess anything, and helping with that ongoing maintenance of a structure like this.
Okay, so just so I think I'm understanding this now and how this the differences here, because right now we have for, well, the majority, I think, of our workforce is organized. And so regardless, so there's a cost of living adjustment that is negotiated. There are steps within the grades that we currently have. And at a certain point, you get to the top of your range and you don't get step increases anymore. And I don't know if merit, and currently I'm not sure how the merit increases go along with that as well. So in many ways, it's a similar approach, but more of a hybrid and more intentional than what I think we have done in the past, especially based on the 65th percentile.
Madam Chair.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's generally. Let me make just a few tweaks around the edges. The 98B class, which we currently have, which is the only performance-related class in Ramsey County, is unrepresented. So we don't have performance in represented job classes, which is unique. There are counties in the region that do, multiple that do. So what we would be saying is, in an effort to not get stonewalled up against the top of those steps, as you mentioned, there's a trade for the idea of performance being injected after the 65th percentile of the market, our new median, going forward. And that's a conversation we have to have with labor through collective bargaining. And we're back at the table this year to begin that conversation. And so I don't want to just assume anything. I just want to lay out, we would like to go in for the first time with a strong vision of how we might like to approach a framework so we can have that conversation with them in a productive way.
So right now, again, right now the merit increase is not part of the contracts that we negotiate.
Correct.
But that looking at this and having discussions and where we're trying to go with this for our overall organizations, we're going to try to blend those.
That's correct. We will, yes, that's a conversation that we would like to open, and I don't, like, it's not a conversation we've yet had, so I don't want to go too far down that road.
Well, and that's, to me, that makes a lot of sense, and I would also support having those discussions. So that, and especially since, I mean, not to be lost in all of this is we're currently at the 50th percentile, and we're trying to move that up to the 65th percentile because of attraction, retention, and you know, keeping people here of the highest quality.
Yes.
So it makes sense to me. Thank you.
This is not a cost-cutting method when you do the math on what you just said, right? So there is value across the organization to all parties, and hopefully to the residents we are serving, which need to be the core fundamental tenet of why it matters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on.
Right. And this moves us on a little bit towards the end here as well. Is, as we said, the recommended salary structure, we've talked about this first half of the slide here a lot, is that the county itself was about 1.5% below the 65th percentile of that market, of the core custom survey group. So it's closely aligned. Is the idea is to anchor that salary structure, that midpoint at that 65th percentile. It has a high validity within the data itself and with a high R-squared value of 0.93. It also allows the county to help to maintain that structure, looking at salary structure adjustments that are going to occur every year with that 9 comparison group to make sure that they can closely align with that salary structure and have a really kind of focused effort and aligns to with the overall conversations with through collective bargaining as well. To say, hey, we're trying to focus on the similar type of labor market here within the comparisons. The next, some of the decisions that may need to be made on the salary structure may reflect on the recommended range spread. We have recommended kind of a progressive range spread, 50% for some of the lower level positions and 60% for some of the higher level positions. The reasoning is because of kind of the impact of experience and knowledge and time to become fully competent in certain roles based upon the decision-making and breadth of complexity, such as a custodian role may take shorter time to become fully competent within that role in comparison to a finance manager, finance director that may take more years to become fully engrossed into the overall spectrum and continuum of responsibilities that exist. So to ensure sustained competitiveness of the market, provide opportunity for that performance base, but have that salary structure midpoint anchored at actual pay on an ongoing basis at the 65th percentile. Kind of brings together our overall recommendations at this point. The next slide, I was going to hand it back to Scott and Joanna. Commissioner Carter, if that is okay now, or if there's any other questions that we need to come into.
Thank you. So let me just check. I know that we just finished a set of questions, but I'll check back. I'm not seeing any questions on our participant screen. I'll pause for commissioners, and then we'll turn it back over. Commissioner McDonough? Is that left
thanks,
over?
Madam Chair. Yeah, this is, no, I think this is probably a good spot here. I just want to kind of catch up here on a couple of clarifications or questions. So going back to the classification and job evaluation, you know, the old system, we had 596, we're down to proposed 325 with your families in series. And you really talked a lot about how you aligned and looked at those alignments and all that. I just want to check in on a couple of other filters that running this through, right? In the past, some of the difficulties with our classifications is they were so rigid that it was really difficult to operate and be responsive because there wasn't flexibility built into those classifications. And I'm wondering if that was a part of the filter that we were running through, not so much about, you know, is this job and this job really aligned where we can just meld that classification, but are we making sure that we have enough flexibility within these classifications that we can be responsive in how we meet the needs of the residents? And then one other piece here that I'll add to it that, you know, was certainly highlighted this last year, right? When we're in a unusual situation or a crisis like COVID did, and we were starting and trying to move people around to be able to meet the needs and bumping up against people that were in classifications and so maybe even sometimes some resistance to being able to be responsive. So I just want to have some confidence that we were looking at this bigger and broader than, you know, this job title and this job title are different, but their responsibilities are very similar. We can bring them together. Did we go a little bit farther than that in ensuring that we have the flexibility to be responsive, whether it's a crisis-driven situation like COVID or just day-to-day operations that evolve and change in meeting the needs of residents?
That's a great question, Commissioner. It's the thought process is not just to take, you know, job titles and try to combine them and say, yeah, we reduced it to 325. It is meant to try to create a classification that is more broad in nature, especially even when it comes to just the nomenclature and the cadence of the wording and all that kind of stuff that's being used in there. So that is something that we definitely learned through the TARP 3 process, is some of the inclusive nature when it comes to the job descriptions and even the policies as well, and try to integrate that into what we're writing here, is to make them broad enough so we're not talking about specific systems or specific programs or anything like that. It's like, here is what this role is within this field, and these are the things that are typically responsible. So if you need to create a new program that is reflective of a public health need or a community action need or a neighborhood, you know, based initiative or anything, it can fit into one of these broader classifications and is equivalent to other ones that might have a similar type of spectrum. You're going to have new grants that are coming in all the time to create new funding that are going to be there. It's like, hey, we need this role. How do we integrate that into our structure? And especially when it comes to some of those broader classifications, there might be program or functional specific responsibilities. So we have, here's the essential responsibilities, and we try to limit those anywhere between about 5 to 10. If there's more than 10 essential responsibilities, the job is way too task oriented, way too specific to a unique role. Have those broad essential responsibilities. If we need to delineate those on program or functional specific, here's why this is a little bit different. We can delineate that separately. Now, we're going to be working with HR prior to any kind of communication broader out. And I'm sure Scott and Joanna will talk about this, but to review the draft classification descriptions that we have as well. to make sure it reflects that. In addition to that, when it comes to the minimum qualifications, our practice historically has always been to say, what is the minimum level of knowledge and experience that somebody needs to come into a role? We're not focusing on that preferred level of knowledge or anything like that. We don't have the education and experience as a driving force into the internal valuation of that job either, because we know that has also been an artificial barrier in some places for increasing the diversity and equity and inclusive nature of a salary system. And that's coupling the TARP 3 and the TARP 4 projects together. And especially with the team that we have on broader team that we have, I mean, Ronnie has been CHRO at multiple public sector organizations, as well as other folks on our team that helping raise that have been HR directors at cities and counties in various parts of the country as well. So
good. Yeah, thanks for calling out kind of that minimum piece, because that has been in so many cases barriers for us to achieve a number of the other goals and priorities for us within the county, you know, requiring a 2-year degree when maybe we just need a certificate or that basic knowledge to get somebody in and actually help bring them along on their career path. So thank you for calling that out. The other question I really want to get a better understanding, and if you talked about this, I missed it, and I went through all the slides and I didn't really see it there. But when we talk salary and we're comparing with all these, you know, core groups and private sector, are we talking salaries and all the benefits that go along with that? Or are we just talking about the wages? Because especially when you start talking public and private, the benefits can really play a role into that. And it's a big part of attraction, right? The salary pay itself might be a little bit less, but the healthcare and the family leave and the vacation and the sick time and the, you know, defined benefit pensions, that all adds value that, you know, is a part of attracting and retaining. And I don't know that that's getting reflected in the salary comparison as you're taking a look at that. And how deep do you go to actually count everything that comes as a part of that job, especially in Ramsey County? Because in some areas, we salary-wise, dollar-wise, we might not be quite there. But if you add in all the other benefits that help support that individual, whether it's, you know, if they've got a family or not, and how there's some, you know, and then their goals for their future, you know, how they want to retire and what that looks like, this can be pretty attractive here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I'm sure Ryan, Scott, or Joanna might have something to add into this, because it is part of that larger strategy of how you combine and have that total compensation package at the county. The scope of this project here was to look at base pay and what the base pay rate is in the labor market and focus on that level. And that's how the published salary surveys would collect it. They're going to divide out base pay from any type of bonus program that might exist in private sector as well. Calculating retirement benefits is something that needs to be considered. There is a multitude of ways to kind of calculate what the value of that retirement package is, because that's going to fluctuate from employee to employee as well, based upon their own personal situations. But there's different ways to get it. We think we need to combine and say, here's how the base pay compares. Here's how our benefits compares. Now, as a county, here's our employment value proposition that would be presented. And so I'm sure the county leadership has some thoughts as well.
And real quick, before you weigh in, because that is really important, right? Because even the benefits that we offer were negotiated in many cases in lieu of wages, right? I mean, the union employees wanted these benefits, and so they were all a part of a negotiating thing. And I just want to make sure that does not get lost here in the translation of just comparing salaries.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McDonough, well said, and this is a conversation we've had throughout. So I mean, this is one of the first questions I had too, as you're trying to understand the data. The spot where I will say it does help is, so as you look at those various labor market groups on that slide, as you look at the first two, that becomes a bigger dynamic than the 3 and 4, because you start looking at when we get into our custom groups, we're looking at comparative organizations that have relatively similar benefit structures. Particularly when you score the benefits on some of those things Mike talked about, you know, 1.3 as the valuation and blah, blah, blah. And so for me, there's a little bit of an assumption that I'm doing there where I say, Hennepin and Ramsey have relatively similar benefits. And so therefore we're looking at this point at salary. It's not a one-to-one. State of Minnesota has different benefits than we do. So that's part of it. The only thing I was going to say is I want to add in one more piece too, which is salary is one component. And I do see it as a retention component to our jobs. I do not think come get paid the most is like the banner we're trying to even put up. And then we have benefits as a part of that as well. The third one that I really want to highlight that is heartening to me is that most people that choose to make a career here, and you all know this from your time working with so many different staff across the organization, people stay for the other benefits as well, serving their community, the opportunity to do good over a longer arc, the diversity of the employment base that works here, good leaders and supervisors. And so continuing to think about all three tiers of that collectively through our competencies, our strategies, and our bargaining with our unions, to me is probably the sweet spot. I'll end on this. I was reminded throughout, it goes to an earlier question. I mean, the spot where counties, and this isn't just Ramsey County, become least competitive is at the highest ends of your jobs, just because the private sector has such inflation pulling it up. And yet, I don't know a lot of our senior leaders who come to work every day and the first thing they're talking about is compensation. They choose these jobs, particularly during right now, because of a care and a passion for service. And I don't want to take advantage of that to a level that's not fair, but at the same time, I always want to uplift that as a big part of what we're trying to do.
Sorry, trying to get back to my mic there. So thank you. I believe then we are at a point to turn it. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Fretham has a question. My apologies. Go for it.
Thanks, Chair Carter. And I don't know if it's so much a question, it's just a comment. And I know it's been touched on a bit before, but the importance of all the other efforts in combination with this change. And I think one thing that I mentioned at the previous workshop that we had, the importance of that development and support for middle management. If we are relying on compensation to be related to performance, we need to have faith across the organization in those evaluations and assessments of performance, which is typically done by middle management. So not only do we need to have those core competencies in that evaluation structure, but we need to know that training is happening for those managers. And also, what is the organization as a whole doing to compare and evaluate how those evaluations are occurring? You know, if we have large discrepancies in how those evaluations are happening, where it is, you know, very easy with some in some areas to get those performance bonuses and very challenging in other areas to get those performance compensation increases, that's really going to undermine the integrity and the intent of the program. So I think it's both, how do we develop and support those who are doing evaluations, and how do we as an agency assess those evaluations as a whole, and what processes do folks have if they feel like their own performance isn't being evaluated well. And that's where the clear career pathways are helpful, when you're able to open up the organization to advancement beyond the team that you're on existing, and potentially be able to move away from a supervision situation that isn't working for you, and to continue to flex your skills. That's helpful as well. But I think first and foremost is that evaluation process and training, but then also how we evaluate our evaluation at a higher level.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Fretham, good points all. It's why we actually led having some of those conversations around competency and what we are trying to do around building those competencies before we had this conversation. Technical solutions and regression analyses will not solve your broader strategic needs or your equity needs within an organization. They are simply guiding points that matter greatly that we need. And so right now, I don't have answers to every one of those pieces. That's going to be part of this ongoing stage dialogue around exactly how. So I think there are two really big ones. How are we consistent across in how we're ensuring evaluations work, as well as how are we doing internal equity analyses as we go? Because the more you move toward a subjective system, the more risk that brings in on that particular category. And so We need to be very thoughtful about that. And so I don't have perfect answers. I just want to highlight and not acknowledge that's what we're working through right now.
So thank you. I know that we're at a point then. Oh, looking back, Commissioner McGuire.
Just thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank Commissioner Fretham and everyone for all their good points. I affirm everything that's been said. I absolutely support this work and thank everyone for the work they've done so far. But really, I want to highlight the importance of what Commissioner Fretham just said about the evaluation process and making sure that's consistent and how we're mentoring our employees along the way and things. So I'm just affirming everything that's been said that I really appreciate.
So thank you very much. And I too want to affirm the statements that have just been made. We certainly have to anchor this in the work that we've done around values and what it looks like and ensuring competency and what that competency looks like, which are discussions that we've had in workshops prior to this step. This adds some concreteness to how we then recognize and compete with equity and flexibility and with the opportunity to together with our regular process of ensuring now very much competency-based movement through, then adding also a performance-based addition, how we compensate to maintain that competitiveness and talent, attraction, retention, and promotion that we need. It certainly means an investment in this area beyond an additional investment in this area that ensures that compensation that we need to be competitive, to remain competitive, and to move beyond that with our performance piece. But it also ensures that we have better outcomes, that we are better able to align to our residents' first work, that we're better able to ensure the ongoing work that we need to do to achieve our goals. So all of that is wrapped up together, and it does require that we attend to the very beginning of the work, which is with those values and competencies, and the end of this work, which is about the categories and classifications and pay. I think that we're ready to move to that next chart, which is about next steps. I believe I should refer back to Gallagher, to Mike, in case there are any additional comments that you want to make before we move on, and that then Deputy County Manager Berg will take us to this next chart and we can complete our workshop. Mike, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I really enjoyed the conversation today and the questions. And if there's anything left unsaid, I'm going to be conferring back with the county and just make sure that we got all the necessary information to you all. But otherwise than that, we're set. We can hand it over back to the county at this point.
Excellent.
Madam Chair, just
go ahead.
Before we transition to that last slide, I think there's one other important point around equity in our compensation that matters in this structure as we go forward. As Ramsey County has diversified significantly across its workforce over the last number of years in particular, if you look at our workplace statistics, you can see some of that yourself. Seniority is still the way we generally compensate people at higher levels here. And so the current system of compensation leads to one in which, unless you have been here for a really long time, it is hard to move up the structure, even once you have proven yourself excellent. And so I want to acknowledge that, because day to day right now, this is something that I feel. And I'm not the only one here who feels it. But if we don't change the system, we have a risk of being viewed as sclerotic and just saying, just wait, in 15 years, it'll all equalize itself. And that's part of why this is a big push right now strategically. And I just wanted to raise that as an important impetus for change as we go forward.
Thank you. Acknowledged. So I do see Commissioner McGuire's hand up. I think it's left. And so I'm going to move on to Deputy County Manager Berg.
Madam Chair, thank you. And actually, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Scott Williams. We are bookending today's presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Yes, I'm walking us through next steps, and this is the same slide you saw, I think, at the beginning of the presentation, and so now walking through the next steps. As Deputy County Manager Berg mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, immediately following this workshop and over the next 2 weeks, we are having a number of opportunities for our county labor leaders and employees to hear this presentation and have an opportunity to ask questions of our Gallagher consultants. I believe there's 3 opportunities for labor leaders and then 3 opportunities between now and I think middle of next week for employees to receive this information and be able to ask questions. So talking about next steps, we are in the process. One of the next steps here is to finalize and share those revised allocations with our departments. As you know from earlier in the presentation, we've gone from 596 existing classifications to a proposed 325. We've got to make sure that all those map over correctly into a department's organizational structure, and we need final review from the departments and Human Resources and Gallagher to make sure that all of that mapping crosswalks correctly, and so we land in a good place. The next piece here is, of course, the performance management system, and Commissioner Fretham really nailed the issue here. This is going to take some time, and this is something new. It has to be done very carefully. It has to tie back to our TARP 1 values. Our TARP 1 work continues. It's moving into a new phase where we're engaging with our employees, giving them the opportunity to do an online survey to help select what those top behaviors, help define what those behaviors are that we want to define our workplace. This performance management system that's going to take us into a new era, essentially, really needs to reflect those values. And someone who is going to move into what we're going to call an enhanced performance zone really needs to be modeling those behaviors in order to be recognized as high-performing leaders. And when I say leaders, I'm not talking about just formal leaders, but informal leaders. There's huge opportunity here for all Ramsey County employees to be informal leaders in serving our residents and demonstrating residents' first values. That's going to take quite a bit of time. We have to develop that system. We have to train on that system. We have to start using the system, and that's going to take some time. Then we have to take the information, take the new benchmark that we're proposing, the 65th percent benchmark, and roll that into our existing job matrix and create a new classification system. And that will involve defining those steps in the proficiency zone, in the enhanced performance zone, and we'll have to look at the salary steps. We'll have to look at the pay ranges. We talked earlier about, is this about retention or is this about attraction? Well, it's both. It's about retaining employees, but as Mike pointed out earlier, our actual pay trend line is bumping up against our maximum. That compression does not serve us well when we're trying to retain or when we're trying to attract talent. So we need to look at that, develop that, bring that back to the board. This will be we're going to develop a plan for a phased implementation. This will be a phased implementation. We just cannot blink this on. As was pointed out, we have majority of our workforce is covered by collective bargaining agreements. So these things will have to be negotiated. We also look at priorities, what we can do sooner versus what has to wait a little bit longer because we, for example, we have to develop that performance management system. This will most likely will come back to the board with a recommendation for a phased approach. So there might be some early steps where, as we put forward a recommendation for a salary structure, we will likely find there are a number of employees, excuse me, who fall below the minimum step one, if you will, of a new classification system. So we might say, look, the priority one is to look at moving those that are unrepresented, that aren't we don't have to wait to negotiate. We may say, look, let's move them at least into the range. And so we might come up with a plan that has something like that as a step one. And so on. Some of these things will have to wait for bargaining, and some of them will have to wait till we have the performance management system. But we will come up with a phase plan, and we'll bring that back to the board along with the proposed salary structure for board approval. Some of these steps might have proposed dates. Others will have events in the future that will trigger those follow-on steps. So we have a few months of work left to do here. We would not anticipate coming back to the board at least till the second quarter of this year, but we would like to come back to the board with something before summer. And unless there are questions, that wraps up the formal part of our presentation.
Well, thank you very much. I don't see questions right now. I want to hold just for a second in case there are any final questions before we wrap up. We've had an excellent update, together with Gallagher, our consultant, and we really appreciate what you've presented. I think you've heard from all members on the call today. Questions, good additions to the information you've presented, but it appears that we are endorsing that movement forward. I'm certain that is the reason for our workshop today. You want to be confident in the meetings that you're having after this presentation, that board members have heard enough, have been able to ask questions, have been able to provide additional content and suggestions for that moving forward, that we certainly consider the broad breadth, that we know we have to do this work with our employees and employee groups in order to see the positive employment benefit that will occur here, at least our thinking around that, and that we're able to set out a plan that, together with the input you've heard here and from our employees and employee groups, will identify how we'll move forward. We'll look toward the events and priorities that will actually drive this forward. So I've talked long enough to call up a question. I will be calling on Commissioner Reinhardt, and we'll be moving toward the conclusion then, if there are no further questions of the workshop. Commissioner Reinhardt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this really, earlier at the county board meeting, I talked about the workshop that had been put on by the Association of Minnesota Counties about burnout. And one of the things with making sure that people are happy and feeling fulfilled and really giving the job and the service that they need to our residents is to make sure that we don't burn them out, basically. And I just wanted to reiterate that again because of how important it is. And the key to the organizational side of preventing burnout is the managers, and whether or not employees felt supported by and motivated by and had a good relationship with how they can communicate. Really, it's about communication with managers. And so I think that what we're trying to do here, as far as kind of melding some of the ways that we attract, retain employees is a very good start. And I'm looking forward to that phased in approach, because we need to make sure that that we are able to keep our talent here and at the highest level when we are recruiting. So it all ties together for me as far as a healthy workplace, and healthy workplace means that we have good services provided to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm looking to see if others, I know you've spoken before, but if there are additional comments you'd like to make prior to our close. Commissioner
Madam
McGuire.
Chair, yeah, just Madam Chair, just because I was in the same workshop that Commissioner Reinhardt was in on burnout, because I wanted to know how we could prevent it amongst all of our employees. And I'm just going to highlight that it just struck me that one of the ways that you prevent it is for employees to feel that they have someone they can go to, that they can feel that they can talk about what their issues are, that they can improve things. The burnout is so strong when they don't feel like they have anywhere to go with their issues. And so I'm just highlighting what Commissioner Reinhardt has said about, having those managers that can really respond and have the time to really respond to their employees. So it would just struck me that was just such a high component of burnout. So, but in addition to everything else that Commissioner Reinhardt said, but it was a really good session. I encourage all of us to, use that, to look at that information, and we can use it in our deliberations too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner McGuire. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. And my last comment on that, Madam Chair, I think we need to be especially cognizant of it at this point in time for a few reasons. I'll raise that. One, the incoming chief of staff to the president-elect mentioned the other day about the appalling death total that we are anticipating seeing in the coming weeks around COVID, at a moment when vaccines are supposed to be rolling out and vaccination has been hamstrung through a lot of the federal pieces we talked about this morning. And so you have folks that are trying to stand up testing and lead that work and continue to do all of that while facing that challenge, and that's palpable. And so I think we're going to be tested, particularly in the next 3 to 4 months, to see how well we can support our staff, and we will do all that we can. But part of it, hopefully, will be a relative sense of expectation and calm that comes our way through a coordinated response moving forward. And in the meantime, we're doing our best to carve out time. But I just want to double down on, I think these next 3 months are going to be, unfortunately, one of the biggest challenges many of us have collectively faced.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the final thoughts that have been shared. I know everyone's had the opportunity to talk during the workshop, to express their questions and suggestions for moving forward. This is a time during which, given the hard work that it will take and the need for employees and all of us to double down to serve our residents in a residents first manner, we do need to make sure employees are feeling cared for, respected, and supported, and seeing this discussion as one which will build in that care, respect, and support. I do hear the endorsement of our moving forward. And so thank you for being here with us today. We look forward to hearing more about the discussions that will follow this meeting, and to hearing back from you within months regarding the work that we will need to prioritize in order to move forward this enhancement and the work that will proceed in our talent attraction, retention, and promotion area. If there are no further comments or additional comments from staff, then we are prepared to conclude. One look over, one reference back then to the team leaders from staff here as well. And if not, thank you very, very much. Thank you again to Gallagher. We'll adjourn this meeting. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.